gave up alcohol about 4.5 years ago, but you lost me at desserts. Like, what do you have? What do you have to live for, man? Right? Running and desserts. I don't know. The only way I'm running that far is if I'm being chased by a bear. So, no, it's the next portion of this program has been designed based on comments that we got back from you from our last conference last year. And one of the most significant or clear comments we got back, clear themes that we got back, was that, you know, particularly with the number of boomers that we have in business that are owning businesses, are starting to think about, gosh, you know, succession is a big deal. In some cases, I've got children who I want to prepare to take the business. In some cases, I don't have any children that I want to prepare to take the business, but I have a key employee. In some cases, a sale looks like a better option to me. And so as we contemplated how to best bring this project or this subject to light, particularly as we've got a room full of CEOs and business owners in the room, we thought maybe it was just best for you to hear the stories of others. So rather than us present to you, we thought it'd be great just to get some folks who have had different journeys through succession and through transition and made that journey successfully talk to you about their own experience. So I'd like to invite the panel. Joe is one of the folks that are going to join us up here. I think Dave Wharton. We've got Don Rogers, and then Loren Feldman from Forbes is going to help moderate the panel. So I'd like to invite you up to the stage. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Good to see you. Nice job, Joe.
Okay. I don't know where to sit. This is a new configuration. This is so comfortable. Our living room. Please go sit here. Hey, Don.
Hey. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I just want to say, in part inspired by Joe, I gave up alcohol about 4.5 hours ago, and it's going really well so far. I'll let you know. It's always great to come back to Aileron. I love this place. I was here last year. Maybe some of you were here. I moderated a discussion last year between Clay Mathill and his son Mike, and we actually talked about the same topic. We talked about his transition both at IMES and then later with the family office and how each of them went. And it was just a great opportunity to be able to talk to both of them. And I learned some really interesting things, or we learned some really interesting things from Clay, who shared that, you know, we all may have heard about the price tag that he was able to sell IMES for to P&G, and it sounds like a relentlessly happy story, but it didn't actually go exactly the way he wanted it to. And if it had been, you know, completely within his control, he would have loved to have kept the business in the family. And one of the things I took away from that is, if Clay Mathill, and we all know how thoughtful and intentional and deliberate he is, if he couldn't manage that process precisely the way he wanted to, then we know everybody's struggling with this. And I think that's the genesis for this discussion. I'm here with 3 really interesting people, all of whom have had very different experiences and learned some lessons along the way, which I'd love to dig into now. Don, maybe we could start with you. I think one of the great things about all of you guys is you've learned from mistakes. You've all had things go not exactly the way you wanted to, and you've adjusted and figured something else out. You've been through some difficult transitions. You just went through a really smooth, great transition. Give us a hint of what went wrong in the difficult ones, and then tell us, you know, what went right more recently.
Should I do like Joe did and give some chronological history here?
Sure, and maybe start by telling us the business.
Okay. Rogers Grain is a grain company in Covington, Ohio, in Miami County, about 30 miles north of here. Our business was started by my dad and his brother in the 40s as a partnership. Very humble beginnings. They were farmers. My dad was a person with an entrepreneurial spirit. They weren't quite making it for 2 families farming, and he bought a truck, and he started doing some trucking. and it wasn't long till he started merchandising the products he was hauling, which led him into the agricultural input business, selling inputs to farmers. So they did that through the 60s when they got in the grain business as a need for services in our community developed. They were asked by customers, would you get in the grain business? We need some, they had a facility for themselves. So they did that. They did that through 1978. It was, I was working for my dad. And I was 32 years old, and I was still an employee. He was 55. And I was getting itchy. He wasn't telling me what the plan was. So I made him aware that if there were no plan, probably I was going to be somewhere else. And he said, you know, if you're not interested, I'm not interested. I like that. So he said, let's figure out how we're going to do this. He had a good friend, an accountant friend, who steered him to a legal firm in Columbus who deals strictly with family businesses, closely held, and with succession. He called that man, and he got us all set up. And my dad and his brother had a partnership, and we drew a line in the sand. My generation, 3 of us, one brother-in-law and one cousin, formed a new C Corp, and we bought them out over a 20-year period and started fresh. 2 years later, another brother-in-law joined, and then there were 4 of us. That was very easy, you know, all family. We saw this opportunity, so we all joined in together, not knowing that maybe we weren't all quite on the same page. We didn't even think about that, you know. This is family, you know, surely this is the way to go, all equal shares. We grew, bought another location, worked hard like Joe mentioned, not thinking about the big picture especially, just making a living and doing the best we could. By 1989, our market had changed. We had expanded in the input business a little more, built some facilities, and we were working hard and too hard. We spent a week, we sat down analyzing where's the money coming from? Where are we making money? Where are we not? We had several ventures. We found out the crop input business was just kind of a wash. It was a lot of work. We put it on the auction block. We sold everything. Had a feed mill, burned that down. Focused on grain, which we saw was where our money was. Well, at that time, part of our operation was farming. The cousin had the farming. He decided he wasn't interested in the grain business, so we spun that off. He left, bought his stock. The brother-in-law who managed the input business, nothing for him to do, he left. We bought his stock. So 2 of us left. Straightforward grain business. That went along well. We continued to grow. One of the partners developed kind of a different business that was part of the same business, but not really in the grain business. And it became apparent at some time that maybe we're not on the same page. And so the result of that was we parted ways. I kept the grain business. My brother-in-law took another part of the business that really was where his interest was. And that was tough. That was tough. We hadn't planned on that. And I'm thinking back, you know, why were we making these changes where we had stockholders, all family, but one by one, I bought them out and diluted my equity every time? Why did that happen? My conclusion is this. It's so easy for family members to get in a family business, all equal shares, everything's rosy. But we've got to all be on the same page. We've got to all have the same mission. We must all have the same focus. We must have people who have the qualifications for whatever is needed in the company. And if we don't, when it comes to time for transition, there are going to be problems. And so as I look back, that refining process in the second generation was really for a reason, for a good purpose. Because in 2001, my son wanted my job. My boys, 3rd generation, all 3 of them came into the business. Again, I made it easy. Family, right? So they all came in, made it easy, not really thinking about qualifications and focus. Over time, it became apparent that not all of them maybe had the right focus, the right qualifications. By and by, 2 of them left. They bought their stock, diluted their equity again. Came down to I owned all the stock. Well, my son, who liked the business, wanted my job. So I said, very well. I was, I forget my age, he was 24, I remember that. So I taught him the merchandise, which is what we do, core of our business. And I wasn't needed anymore. Well, it so happens we had an affiliation since 1982 with an agricultural consulting firm in Florida, affiliated with this group, by the way, that had been a very healthful relationship, that we had done a lot of networking, learned a lot about our business. I took a job with them, traveled the country for the last 18 years till this past June, working with other companies like ours, helping them, bringing value there, learning things I could bring back to my company while my son ran the business. Well, it wasn't long until he was making the major contribution, not me. So in 2016, we drew a line. He was the only stockholder, and that transition was painless, absolutely painless. He had the qualifications for the job. He had the passion for the job. And so I was history.
For that to be painless, you must have been ready to do it somehow. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of people, find their pain. It's hard to let go. How were you able to do that?
Okay, first of all, it was the example of my dad at 55 years old. I was older than that, by 10 years or so. At 55, his attitude, if you're don't want to do this, I'm gone. So if you want to do it, here it is. So how could I do anything else? Plus, the business was being run very well, and he had it covered. And I was fine with that. So it really was, I wish I could have done it earlier. I might mention that through the years, in spite of the stockholder issues, pains we suffered, the market also changed in our business. In the mid-2000s, a mandate from the government brought a new player into our market. We're essentially a middleman, buying grain from producers, selling it to the market. Well, a new player came to our market whose mode was to buy it from the producer instead of us, which in the grain business you need volume. It's a large volume, low margin business. Well, to us it became a low volume, low margin business. That doesn't work. And so we had to adapt to that. And through our networking with White Commercial, our affiliate, we had learned of a niche opportunity. We had our antenna extended, ears open. We found a niche opportunity. In 2014, had we not found that, I don't think we would be in existence today. My son devoted himself to that with a passion, and the business immediately grew. And last Monday, he announced that one of the major companies that he deals with wanted an equity stake in our business, which didn't interest him at all initially. But when a $5 billion company comes saying, I would like a part of the action, he finally agreed to do that. And as of Monday, he has a joint venture with a company with 100 offices around the world. And now he's looking for the next chapter to go forward. So we went through a lot of trials and tribulations to get there. But as of this week, I think it was worth it.
I want to hear more about that deal. I want to hear more about how you decided which of your 3 sons was the right one. But before we get to that, let me introduce Dave Wharton. Dave, you You had a career in Silicon Valley as a venture capitalist. You made it to the top. You were working for Kleiner Perkins. You, in your words, I think, created a lot of wealth. And yet you decided that you were on the wrong path. What was so bad about it?
Thanks, Loren. That's an interesting framing of it. I think for me what happened, and I started 3 technology companies also before working and during my time at Kleiner Perkins. I found that what had happened in Silicon Valley, there had been a shift, and some of this is now coming out, and it's taken a while. But when I first got involved in technology, it was at Hewlett Packard when I was 16 years old. And I worked on a manufacturing line, worked long hours, 6 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. That's how I saved up enough money to go to college. And what I loved about that experience was the manufacturing workers loved to talk about Dave and Bill, the 2 founders. Well, they founded the company in 1937. This is the 80s, and they're still telling stories about it. And what was so profound about these stories is, A, they were larger than life. After I went and tried to validate these later, clearly they were a little blown out of proportion. But they were all about how they treated people. And so, to be these line workers making probably 50% higher than minimum wage, to talk about how much respect Dave and Bill have for us, the people right here on the front lines, that was a very strong impression created in my mind. And so I had this perception at a young age that businesses were good, and that businesses took care of their people, and they took care of their communities, and they were inventive, and and there was just this kind of energy about it. And this is, frankly, at the time, HP was in decline. I didn't know that, but later kind of came to understand that better. So that was a touchstone for me. And then when I ended up working at Kleiner Perkins for John Doerr, who at the time was considered probably the best venture capitalist in history, I was his right-hand guy. He had just taken Netscape public about 4 months before when I first met him. And then when I joined, Amazon had just gone public about 3 weeks prior. And At Home, if you remember, At Home went public my first week on the job. And I went on these road shows and stuff. And I thought, wow, I'm finally at the pinnacle. I'm at the place that builds the amazing companies. This is where the good stuff happens. HP, that's probably a bit antiquated. Let's see what this is all about. And I got caught up in it. I absolutely got caught up in it. And we were taking companies public every week, generating tremendous wealth. In a very short amount of time, you probably remember this, we were taking companies public with $3 or $4 million of revenue, and been 18 months old, being valued at billions of dollars. And when I started seeing, and this took a while to really understand it, was while we were creating tremendous wealth for the general partners of Kleiner Perkins and the limited partners, many being universities, so you could feel good about that, we really weren't building great companies. And some exceptions happened, right? Amazon happened, Google happened, some others. But that's the very small percentage. That's the 1% of the 1%. 99% of the companies that we got involved with, I think you'd have to go back and look at this, I would say had broken cultures. They were very transactional. Most of those companies failed. I'd say probably 60 to 70% of them. And it does a lot of damage when one of those companies fails. And the damage is that the demand put on the employees is extraordinary. I mean, most people are asked to work 7 days a week. They're asked to work from early to late. And they're done this, and the deal is that we're going to give you stock options. You will become wealthy. You will be able to retire at a young age, buy a house, do everything else. And so it's worth it. Give everything. And, we love that you love your families, but you got a job to do. And what ends up happening in most cases, those stock options are worth zero. The average company in Silicon Valley is sold for about $80 million if it's sold. Most companies aren't sold, they're shut down. And so if you kind of do the expected value calculation, which I have not done, but I want to do someday, I think you'll find that the expected value of a stock option in Silicon Valley is close to zero. Yet people believe it's worth millions and millions and millions of dollars, so they make tremendous sacrifice. So I say that because, and I'm sorry if I'm going a little bit long, for me it was kind of a moment of intersection, and Joe talked about this in 2009, 2010. I think there was a lot of reflection going on in the business community, and I was having a similar type of reflective period. And it wasn't working for me anymore. It wasn't right to kind of go build companies under this model. And the other thing that I was getting very tired of is I was getting very tired of every time I talked to an entrepreneur, they wanted to know what I wanted to know so that I'd write them a check. And I'm like, no, I want to know what you want to do. What's your purpose? What's the culture you want to build? And what they do is they'd mirror most of them would mirror what they thought I wanted to hear. And then that manifests itself into, then you get involved with these entrepreneurs. I'm not saying these are bad people. These are rational human beings. And then they immediately start talking about, okay, we got to go raise the next round of financing. what do you think we need to do to raise the next round of financing? I'm like, what do you need to do to serve your customers? And what do you need to do to be of service to your employees? It's like, oh, no, that's fine. What do you think is going to get us that next check at a high valuation so we minimize our dilution and we get the next round of financing to go? So companies were being built to raise cash, not to actually generate cash. And at the end of the day, core value is built in businesses by their ability to generate cash and reinvest that cash productively. So talk about just kind of this almost separating of like company building styles. And so something that I think was very closely matched 40 years ago, Silicon Valley and throughout the rest of the country, has really separated. There's a pattern of company building now, which is raise cash at high valuations, sell those companies for a lot of money, buy a yacht, get on the front page of Forbes. You know, that's success. And I think what's gotten lost in this, and this is where I've come to, is that there's a kind of company, and Joe used the term earlier, which we've coined the term evergreen, that represents a business that's deeply purpose-driven, that puts its people first, that's going to build itself from its own profitability, and it's going to position itself through kind of a paced growth approach with a little bit of innovation at every level of the company to be around for 100 years or more. And that's kind of the part about the transitions. They're designing these businesses to be well beyond their own lifetimes. And it may be with their families, it may be with their employees, it may be a combination of family and employee like Joe's doing with the Motz Corporation. And so that's where my energy has gone to. And what I've come
You started an organization called Tugboat that
Institute.
actually encourages companies to take this path.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Tugboat.
Yeah, so, and I'll just say one last thing. So we see this as an alternative to what is being celebrated in the press today. And frankly, probably a lot of people in this room would resonate
Do we
with.
have to keep knocking the press?
So sorry, Loren. You'll fix this. You'll fix this. And then it was interesting, and then I'll come back to Tugboat. A gentleman named Josh Barron came and spoke at a conference we had earlier this year, and he really challenged me. He said, stop talking about this as an alternative. This is a competitive advantage. He said, in most markets, building a company this way is a competitive advantage. The world has forgotten this. The business schools in the United States have forgotten this. The press, has forgotten this. But this is the best of capitalism. Companies built this way that are profitable, they're growing, they treat their employees well, they can go home at night and feel proud of the contribution they made, still have dinner with their families, still coach the local, the team that their kids are on. And so anyway, that's what the Tugboat Institute's become, and what we started about 6 years ago, is to celebrate this kind of company. And so for me, talk about John Doerr being there taking companies public to this is a lot less sexy today. And my hope is this becomes a lot more sexy in the future. And at some time, I'll go to a place like Stanford Business School, which I've spoken to about this, and people won't pull out their phones and start texting each other because they're just bored with this. And my vision and hope is someday you'll go to an environment like that, not that Stanford Business School is so important, but people will be like, wow, no, my intentionality is to build a great evergreen company, or wow, this is great because my dad built a great company. I understand the importance of this company and why I want to lead this company for another 50 years so that hopefully someday my kids will take on that responsibility to continue leading this company because these are great companies.
That alternative may not be sexy right now, but you're not talking necessarily about tiny businesses. You're talking about businesses that find a way to grow.
Yeah.
What's the alternative? How do they do that without taking venture capital?
The most important thing they do is they're thoughtful about their business model so they understand how to generate cash without requiring a lot of external cash. And business models matter a lot, and people underestimate that. And the second is their planning horizons are just much longer. So instead of trying to be a $100 million revenue company in less than 5 years, which you might try to do if you're backed by venture capital, the goal might be, well, let's extend that time period to 20 years, and I'll be a $1 billion revenue company in 20 years. Because you guys know these curves go like this. And so if you compound over long periods of time, small growth rates like 15%, they become very big companies. In the context of Silicon Valley, you have to compound at 100% or more a year because you got to get big really fast to get a high exit valuation so that your investors can get their cash back in a short amount of time because that translates into IRR. And IRR, internal rate of return, is one of the most important measures put on venture capitalists and other investors. So if you're willing to extend your time horizons, pace your growth over long periods of time, have a more balanced, to say, company growth plan, you can build something significant over long periods of time. You just can't do it in short periods of time.
Joe, I know from our previous conversations that you had a kind of a turning point in your career, where your business, where you went from a general landscaping business to focusing on the turf, the sports stadiums, and you actually sold off the landscaping business. And by many measures, it was an extremely successful sale. You sold it for a high multiple. It went, to most eyes, exactly the way one would hope something like that could go, so that you could focus on what you really wanted to build. But you weren't entirely happy with that transaction, I know. Tell us about what disappointed you.
Yes, that hits at the heart. The model that that we all seek to have, a win-win, is ever so difficult, for us in any business. I think we all understand that as we go along. It's how do I ever get off of this flywheel? And part of it is developing, obviously, the right kind of culture, the right kind of organization. And answer your question, Loren, I didn't just happen upon the 2009 realizing this is my chance. It started 10 years prior when I had the lawn care side of the business, which is basically lawn fertility programs, home lawns like ChemLawn and Scott's kind of operations. Ultimately, was dealing with a different model at that time. I mentioned command and control. So there wasn't a lot of autonomy, a lot of ability for each one of my management team members to build their own space and decisions. And the model of landscape maintenance and lawn care that I had grown, while it was a really nice business sector, was one that I became really frustrated with, because I had to be managed on top of it all the time. And I relate it similar to a garbage collection route, and there are 600 accounts, and you've got to get through all 600 with your truck, with the fertility. And what's your goal at the end of that? Well, you get to start right back over and do that 600 again, and do that year in and year out. So I had more and more frustration with trying to build the kind of thing I imagined could happen in a company. And honestly, I was lucky in that consolidation started taking place in the late 90s. And I just really was lucky enough to be caught that at a high point. Ultimately sold to the Scott's company. Great company, but like any company doing roll-ups, the promises were made relative to the team. I felt I was being intentional about making sure my team was covered. But either the money, the green, was an attractive object, or I didn't put enough intentions in place. And they're a great organization, but, with any acquiring company, obviously they're going to change the model up. That's what they've got to do to get a return on that kind of investment. Because I could, they were paying on revenues, which was crazy. It's like, how are you ever going to, it's too good to be true kind of thing. But I'm 45 years old at 99, and I'm getting applauded, and my business colleagues are applauding me like, man, you've made it big, man. You're going to be able to take off. And I was internally feeling so hollow. What made it much more real for me was part of that sale was I retained the real estate in my operations, and so I had the building. We had our fledgling sports turf division at that time that I was growing. Much more excited about it being different, that being a differentiator and a place where we could do things differently than everybody else was doing. But we were in the same building together. So after the sale, I continued to lease for 2 years. And so I literally, as the former employer, had to cross paths with now my former employees coming in every day. And that was really a painful thing. I can remember the day firsthand when my manager came in. It's, you know, trying to get a win-win is so difficult. And yet I was like so thankful for the fact that I still had this other business sector. People ask me, would you do that again, Joe? And honestly, as callous as it might sound, I would. As much, but because I needed that funding, I needed to change direction, I need to build a different model. But just realizing there's an underbelly to those things, and Don, you certainly experienced that too in yours in that transition. And so for me, that put me on a quest of finding a new model and really put me on the road to more of what we're all talking about, is sustainable business with purpose.
But you structured the business differently. Tell us about the ownership that you currently have.
That led me down the path to ultimately this idea of selling in versus selling out. We've been quite attractive for the last 10 years, and we're a unique player in the industry because we're pretty, we have a landlocked, we're concentrated in this regional area as it pertains to our field construction group, and we're known by that flagship entity. So while we've been pursued from companies on the outside, I kept going through my head this replaying this model and go, oh my gosh, I don't know at 60 something if I can deal with that, because the model of organization was so different. We're so transparent, sharing everything. I thought there's no way. So pretty early on, the idea of us becoming an evergreen model, the Tugboat model, was extremely attractive to where I needed to be in a better place. For us, the selling in is in doing a sharing with the company, so developing an employee stock ownership program. We're doing that on a pace basis, not all at one time, because we want to allow the organization. I'm viewing it as more of bringing new energy, attracting new energy into the organization rather than checking out. I'll probably roll out on a gurney one day, but hopefully I do more coaching, and my team is leading the effort. So that really excites me now. I'm just so thankful to have that opportunity.
I want to open this up to questions in a second, now that you know who these guys are and what they've been through. But let me take the first one. How did you pick the right son? Did you have a process? Did they self-select? How did that go?
Well, the son who owns the company today was the manager / merchandiser. Again, it comes back to qualifications and passion. He was the one who had the passion to move it forward.
Did the other two understand that?
Now you're asking the hard questions.
That's what we're here for.
I think so. Yes, deep down, I think so. And something I wanted to say, I forgot. In all the instances where I bought stockholders who went somewhere else, they've all been successful where they went, forming their own businesses that they were better suited for, I should say. So even though some of those things were difficult while we were going through them, they've turned out well. As I look back, I see a refining.
Is that true of the two sons who didn't stay in the business as well?
Yes, I would say they're doing what they're suited for. Yeah, one's a corporate pilot today. That's what he loved to do, and that was his passion. Yeah. So those were difficult times, but as I look back in retrospect, I see those things as a refining process to keep the business going to where succession would not be a problem. Because had we not dealt with those things in real time, I think when succession came, we would have had issues to deal with. So I didn't see that as we were going along. I didn't know that. I didn't know what we were doing. But we were refining the company. Our mission is this, is to provide income and growth for the stockholders, to provide for the welfare of our employees, and to bring value to the community. And everybody must be on that page, and I think the refining process we went through enabled us to meet those goals.
Who's got a question? I think Wes has a mic over here.
Could you tell me some more about the kind of phased in for the ESOP? How much each GOP executives like you and small kinds of praise like Loren? But I want to learn more about your perspectives about the ESOP phasing in.
Yeah, it'd be great to meet one-on-one to give you more background. You have to be on guard because I'm the generalist, you know, so I'm not good on details. So that's one thing I started to learn in '09. So part of the key, I think, is for me was making the decision on whether to quarterback this ourselves or to get the right external support. What I would highly recommend in my position as being the generalist is going around and looking at a lot of other companies that have gone that path. And I did so across the country because I was really wanting to be intentional. This is my last chance to get this right. So I visited with companies both that where it was driving an inordinate amount of energy in the company, and then others where it was more of a checkout, you know, and trying to get into how did that play out and why did that happen. And what I realized, you know, there's like any program, every ESOP is unique. It's going to be unique to your company. So mine had to be unique to us. But I picked up pieces from each of those. And the piece of advice I think that the first piece is whether you're going to quarterback it yourself. And we happen to bring on the right CFO expertise ahead of that process so that I could take advantage of the strategy we had been developing to be more, take the risk of quarterbacking it ourselves versus having an advisory group. And then the second is finding the really capable leadership team that you have high trust in. So feeling that, you know, they're not doing this once in a while, but this is their main focus. You know, you don't want somebody other than a heart surgeon when you're in cardiac arrest. So same kind of thing as where I came here is finding that legal team and specific person that really had our back and was really skilled at it. And that's the internal and the external components that just gave me the trust that, hey, we can build this the right way. And then the third for me was not to get too complicated with it. You know, I don't have near as many zeros as some of the Silicon Valley players. But it's really meaningful to me and to my people. And so I wanted to have a model that was clear for everybody, for the leadership of the organization down to the entry-level position. And so making that something that we even have changed the name. We've branded it ourselves as employee ownership. We're, in fact, certified employee owned. Simply because when, you know, a name like ESOP, everybody has a different feeling of what that is. But when everybody is able to say, we're 100% employee owned because Joe's now an owner too, it speaks to everybody.
Questions?
Got a question over here. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Enrique Odio. I come from Costa Rica.
Oh,
A little far away.
That's cool.
Warm too. I have a question for you guys, maybe Dave especially. Dave, you said that the true value of a business is the ability to generate cash. There are difficult times that a manager or somebody has to decide on cut costs to be more competitive. When is it a time to think about if you should get rid of some people or not? Because those are difficult questions, especially if you've had people that have been there for a while, but you feel that they should be performing better or something. So I know there are sort of things that people ought to do, but when is formula about it, or do you guys have a thought about it now? Thanks.
So I'll share the experience this has been shared with me, so maybe a little bit less valuable, but I'd say most of the people I consider to be the great evergreens, the exemplars, it doesn't mean they allow their workforce to stultify. It doesn't mean they don't have very high expectations of the workforce. And that's part of it's the deal, which is, if we're gonna build a strong company, you have to be contributing also. And that's, it goes both ways. And so just because you're here and we put people first doesn't mean you get to keep your job forever if you're not able to contribute. What I have heard, and is very interesting, is that often you find people who are kind of at their limit of their capabilities in the current role, and to promote them would be a mistake. And so there's the kind of seniority bias to go ahead and promote them. And I'd say some of the smartest leaders are like, no, that's not what we're gonna do. We're not gonna have that. Doesn't mean we're gonna let you go, but we better find a place you can add value, and that may even mean less compensation, because we were paying you based on not only what you're doing today, but your future potential. That potential isn't there. So let's go find another role for you. And so I'd say that's one idea I've heard. Another is that many of the evergreens, they actually look at recessions as positive events for the company. And so they actually keep debt levels low, and then they're prepared in recessions to actually be aggressive. And in some cases, famously, Jack Stack is building $100 million at SRC. If you've heard of SRC, the kind of the brains behind GGOB, he's building a $100 million war chest right now in anticipation of the next recession, because he believes a lot of the private equity-backed firms in his industry are going to fail. They've taken on way too much debt, so he's going to buy those companies for pennies on the dollar, as long as their cultures aren't so fractured they can't be said. So in that way, instead of looking at something as a moment of weakness, he looks at that as actually an opportunity for rapid growth and success of the company. And then I'd say, lastly, you do nobody any favors if you weaken the company from an expense standpoint. And so maybe that's what you're getting at, is that for whatever set of circumstances have occurred, the company is in a weaker position than it should be in. You have to preserve the organization. And I think in doing those kind of layoffs, you have to be very honest with the employee base about the mistakes made by management as well as potentially the team. But you have to do it. I mean, you have to preserve the company. And so, and I think people understand that. And Don said this very well. And the thing I've learned through Silicon Valley, even though I talked about these very long weeks people work and all this, people find jobs. And often they find jobs that are actually better fits for them than they were in the first place. I think the only thing you owe your employees, if you're people first, is you got to treat them with respect through that process. Do not blame them. And do not make them feel like bad people for it, and do whatever you can in your power to make those transitions as smooth as possible. But anyway, that'd be a few thoughts.
If you're looking for an actual formula, the best one I've heard, I think, is from a business owner who told me that his belief is that if you have someone working for you who, if they were to come into your office Monday morning and announce that they were leaving, and you would feel relief at that, you're not doing your job. Question?
Hello, gentlemen. My name is Greg Knox. I have a company called Knox Machinery. We're a machine tool distributor in the local area. I've got a couple of quick questions. First one's to Dave. Dave, a number of years back, I had a pretty tragic relationship with a company. There was a well-established, good company with a very good culture. And then they went public. And once they went public, it was Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah.
And what really ended up, I ended up becoming about 90% of my business, and I canceled them. Young and foolish. I should have built the next bridge before I burned the one I stand on. But I got
You look healthy.
I must say. But what happened in that case is the culture went from really caring about the customers intimately to not giving a darn about customers, and everything was for the shareholders, and everything became on a quarter continuum. And I'm wondering, was that unique, or how prevalent is that? It was my main exposure, and it's really caused me to turn down a number of corporate manufacturers since, and I prefer family businesses. Many of them are over $1 billion, so they're established family businesses. But how prevalent is that, and is that something you would say, no, Greg, don't knee-jerk, that was unusual, or yeah, that's probably what you're going to get?
It's probably what you're going to get. Unfortunately, I'd say the exception, and I've been learning about this, is public family-controlled businesses. Brown Forman, Estee Lauder, Ford Motor Company. and maybe, and there's, I believe, 200 of them. We believe 30 of them are evergreens, that even though they're a public company, they actually live by a set of values that are much more important than the quarter-to-quarter performance. But unfortunately, I think that's what you're talking about is common. I'll tell you a quick story. Howard Behar, who was at Starbucks, I think most people have respect for Starbucks, joined at 25 stores, scaled it to 10,000 stores. He was the number 2 to Howard Schultz. The reason Howard Behar left the board of directors of Starbucks is because of a dynamic you're talking about right there. They were going to miss the quarter by a penny, and Howard Schultz asked Howard Behar, make the quarter. And he goes, I cannot make the quarter unless I lay people off. And would have to do it immediately, and would have to do it fairly dramatically to have enough to move it by that penny. And so he said, so of course we're not going to do that because we care about the culture and the people at Starbucks. And Schultz said, and I'm being crude, he said, no, we're going to make the quarter. So you get me the penny. And Howard said, if you do this, you will put our culture back, Howard Behar, 5 years. And Howard Behar really is the culture of Starbucks, not Howard Schultz, so Schultz takes a lot of credit for it. And he ignored it. And so they did it. He resigned and left, and they damaged their culture for a number of years. And so I asked Howard Behar this question. I said, well, let's talk about in the context of an evergreen company. Let's say you're on the board of directors of an evergreen as an independent. What do you think the decision would have been there? And he just laughed and said, you would never lay off anybody for a penny a quarter. You just wouldn't do that. And that just says, to me, that's the difference. And that's why you're working with other well-run private businesses is a very positive thing. Now, it doesn't mean assume all of them are good. But again, that's why we're hoping something like Evergreen and putting a framing around it, where people say, look, I want to work with other evergreens because you have the same set of core values as I do. You're not just a family business. You're not just a private business. You're one living by these really important, and you're going to be held accountable to them too. You will hold somebody else accountable to those. So I'm not saying all private, I mean, I'm kind of with you. I think unfortunately the public domain has shifted so much. I was on the board of a private company that went public. I saw the exact same thing. I cannot get the management team to talk about the customer for a year because we were so concerned about making our quarters, because what you don't want to do is go public and miss a quarter. And we want to have 8 quarters of outperformance. And so every board meeting, 4 hours, was how are we going to massage this? What are we going to do to make sure we make those quarters? The company ended up being sold for a very large number also. But to me, it was not very satisfying to see that.
Don, are you concerned about the impact on the culture of your business of the big investment your son has taken?
The joint venture? It's brand new, of course, but we are not at this point because this large company has contacts around the world. The niche market we're serving now is the food industry, which is like our soybeans are going to Japan. So we need players like that as partners. They view us as a resource to help them service the markets they take care of. We view them as a resource for us to meet markets that we couldn't do without them. And they have promised my son that you're good at what you do, you just keep doing what you've been doing. So we're taking their word for it at this point.
And Don, curiously, hey Don, a real quick question. Is the parent company still 100% owned by your son? This is a JV that's 50-50, that's below the parent company, or is it part of the parent company?
My son owns a majority interest in the company.
Okay, so you still have control of this.
He still has control, yes.
Question.
Did you want to come? You want to ask? Yeah.
Back here.
Good morning. My name is Jenny Wermeyer. I work with Anthony Cole Training Group in Cincinnati, and my question is for Joe, but really for the panel. I'm interested in the open book accounting and kind of what you shared and the impact of that.
So I mentioned a specific brand, the Great Game of Business, which is a model of open book management. And what I like, what we were doing prior to is open book awareness. So we would make everybody aware of what we were doing in the financials and continue to try to educate them to what that means. In the Great Game of Business, the biggest, it put it on that relationship more on steroids because we reached out to key players in areas of the company that affect certain lines. So we go out to the person that's dealing with, direct labor costs. and you own that line. You know before we do in accounting what happens out there on the front line in your respective area. So, Dan, we want you to own that. And Mary, you know what is going on over in on our marketing team and what expenditures you need to make this month. So in short, it gets everybody, there's a lot of education needful and you have to have the right CRM so people can access the data. But to have them truly have ownership in the process and take pride in the fact that they're forecasting the right end of the month outcome we huddle every week, 15 minutes per business unit to focus in on what's happened on your line since last week that you can tell us about that'll determine what the end of the month outcome is going to be. So that our refinement has become one of first people getting educated to understand it to now taking pride in hitting the mark as close as possible to what the actual outcome was. So it's just a really powerful force in getting everybody fully engaged in that process.
I've spoken to a lot of business owners who've gone through the process, and I think one thing that often gets lost is it's a difficult process. It's not just opening the books literally and sharing it. It's teaching people how to understand the numbers, make sense of it, figure out what drives the business. Yeah. But when it works, a lot of business owners have told me that they feel as though it's kind of taken the weight of the world off their shoulders because they're no longer responsible for solving every problem. A lot of the best answers are coming up instead of being imposed from the... Was that your experience?
Definitely, because that's where it's happening first, you know, and a lot of times you never know about it until after it happened, you know, where this way they're out there taking pride in the fact that, but the right kind of culture, you've got to, you know, shout out the mistakes, learn from them, work together. All those things so needful before people are willing to do just that and be honest.
How does that fit with the evergreen model?
It's extremely powerful. And the one thing I'd say about it, and I'm not a practitioner like Joe, but I've studied this, is a great game of business to me is a weird name. Great game of business. Game? It's not a game, it's my business. This is serious stuff. And the brilliance of Jack Stack framing this is that, no, what you're missing is that if you ask somebody to go on a field, and the field looks like a football field, but they're trained in how to play baseball, it's very confusing. And if a football player goes onto a baseball diamond, they're trying to find where the end zones are. And they're like, what's going on here? And they said, no, what you have to do is you have to teach your employees, what game are you playing? And if you teach them the game and the rules of the game and what success looks like, it unleashes their capabilities and their role in the game. And so to me, that's the brilliance of the metaphors. That's what he's really doing. Then all the reporting and the huddles and everything else is really bringing that to life. But it's a very powerful thing. And if you think about a company that's going to be around for 100 years, you better know how to innovate at every level of that organization. Because whatever you are today, you're going to be different 100 years from now. And in my mind, empowering people to think like business owners and knowing what a return on invested capital is, understanding the value of $1 of expense versus $1 of revenue, that's what unlocks all this creativity. That's what gets people really starting to contribute. And then having the culture where you can receive and then incorporate those ideas is very, very powerful. So to me, that's absolutely a best practice.
A lot of people talk about wanting to get their employees to behave like owners. Well, one way to get them to act like owners is to make them owners.
Yeah. And I'll tell you one thing, just as a point of contrast. You walk into the average venture capital backed firm in Silicon Valley and you ask any employee, what is an income statement? They'll say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Say, what is a balance sheet? They'll say, I have no idea what you're talking about. What's your firm's profitability? I don't even know if we're profitable. Have you ever seen the finances of your business? I've never seen the finances of our business. But I can tell you we raised money at $7 a share last year, and next year we're going to raise it at $15 a share. That's what my boss tells me at least. What if you don't raise the money? I don't know. I'm not sure what happens. Maybe there'll be layoffs. Maybe we'll be shut down. I don't really know. I'm sorry. I got to get back to what I'm doing right now because I've got some deliverables on my product. I mean, it's just, you know, you talk about a place that's got so much entrepreneurship, but it's not even teaching the employees in those firms how to be entrepreneurs. More people are learning how to be entrepreneurs in Joe's firm than the average firm in Silicon Valley, and I think that's pretty powerful.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Wow.
I'd like to piggyback. While he's moving the mic over, I think the question from the gentleman from Costa Rica is so powerful. And one, you know, obviously I lead strategy from the heart, and it's that balance all the time that you have to think about between, your responsibility as leader of the enterprise and also the responsibility of the people within it, and make that really tough call that ultimately my job here is for the sake of this enterprise. And sometimes the best decision is that somebody that really is good, you help coach up for a different opportunity, maybe even outside your organization to get there. There's always pain with that, but looking back, if you always come from that perspective, I think you can keep your enterprise best practices in place and still have that connection with your team. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you for all your contributions. We're a smaller business, professional design services, less than 20 employees. We're hovering between 18 and 20. Just lost a very key employee due to us doing the great game of business. We've been sharing financials for the last 2 years, trying to educate the team, and we're getting ready to roll out our own self-managed, because we're not large enough for an ESOP, ownership structure. And I was requested to provide my team with non-disclosure and non-solicitation agreements because we didn't have one in place. And I'm getting a lot of pushback, and that's why the key member left. We had a key member leave that was hired by our key employee or client about 6 months ago. And so how do you manage, I know it's required and it's necessary, for the trust and value in the company, but what do you do if you have a team that half of them don't want to sign and you still have to run your business and you want to move forward? And, of course, the legal eagles tell you can't split, you can't treat certain people certain ways. So it's kind of something that's kind of, touching our business right now and challenging us, and your insights would be very valuable.
Can I make sure I understand? The key employee who left because
Of the non-disclosure.
did not want to sign the non-disclosure.
No.
And explain that how.
Because said we didn't trust her.
And joined your client, though, right?
Well, the one that joined the client, we didn't have the disclosure agreement. And actually, our client recommended and gave us advice to do a non-solicitation as opposed to admit in their contract to not steal our employees. So it's interesting.
That's a double punch in the stomach. I know we're up against it, but the key, I would say, is that it is the phrase trust but verify. Starting that, because you have to start it when the person first walks in the door. We have an adult contract here, and part of it is there's a lot of things you're going to learn because we're that open that we're going to share with you. And we have everybody sign a non-disclosure. But I know what you're saying once you're in the process, and then what I would look for is that opportunity where you're going to you're going to give something out, either a bonus or an opportunity, and connect it with that we're going into a new place together. We've got to trust that everybody is on board. We're never fully sure of that. And so I want to find the ones that are true believers. And together, we're going to share more than we ever have before. Maybe in the end, that person did you a blessing, They kind of got to look at it that way. And then regroup and develop that trust with the rest of the team, but verify.
Joe Motz, Don Rogers, Dave Wharton, thank you all.